World leaders condemn the storming of Brazil's democratic institutions on Sunday. Supporters of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro ransacked the National Congress, Supreme Court and presidential palace in the capital, Brasilia. Newly installed President Luis Inacio Lula da Silva blamed his opponent for the violence. Bolsonaro is in self-imposed exile in the US state of Florida. He condemned the violence on Twitter, saying the forced entry into and looting of public buildings had nothing to do with peaceful protest. He also rejected the allegations that he encouraged the crowd.
Thousands of protesters on the roof of Brazil's National Congress. On the ground, some smashing their way inside the Supreme Court. These are supporters of Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. They still refuse to accept that he lost the election last October. And they're taking their anger out on anything they can find. President Lula da Silva, who wasn't in the capital as the chaos unfolded, condemned the protesters, blaming his predecessor.
These are real vandals, destroying everything in their path. We believe that there was a lack of security, and I want to tell you that all of those who did this will be found and punished.
Bolsonaro, who's in self-imposed exile in the US, posted a series of tweets, including, "Peaceful demonstrations in the form of the law are part of democracy. However, depredations and invasions of public buildings, as occurred today, as well as those practiced by the left in 2013 and 17, break the rule." He also wrote, "In addition, I repudiate the baseless accusations attributed to me by the current head of the executive of Brazil." After several hours, police and security services regained control, using tear gas and rubber bullets. Hundreds of Bolsonaro supporters have been arrested.
This is an injustice. There are no criminals here. We were just protesting. We want to save the country.
As order was restored in Brasilia, President Lula was back in the capital surveying the damage. With the country on high alert, the international community has rallied to support Lula and to condemn Sunday's violence.
Well, Francis França is head of DW's Brazilian service. First of all, why the unrest? Were there irregularities in the election?
We don't have any evidence of irregularities in the election. We had international observers in Brazilian election. The codes for all the electronic urns, they are open. Any political actor can audit them. The army did that, and they published a report where they didn't find any evidence of fraud. They just mentioned some vague security breach possibilities without being concrete about that. So no, we don't have evidence of fraud in the elections. But Bolsonaro and his supporters have repeated over and over fake news that have been already debunked in the past years, and they just seem to stick in the social media networks where Bolsonaro supporters discuss.
So how similar is this to what happened in Washington? Bolsonaro was falsely alluding to fraud claims even before the election.
We have the same motive, the president that doesn't accept his defeat. It was clearly inspired in the Capitol invasion on January 2021. Bolsonaro alluded to that many times, even before the first round of the election in October. He was already suggesting that he would recognize the result of the election only if he thought that it was a clean election. So they were already preparing the terrain for that. And you have, on one side, it was bigger than the invasion of the Capitol because you had the three houses that are the pillars of Brazilian democracy attacked and invaded. But on the other hand, the protest was on a Sunday the Bolsonaro supporters always make protests on Sundays because they say that they are working class and they don't do protests on the weekdays. So it was on a Sunday. So you didn't have any meetings taking place there. You don't have these dramatic scenes of Congress people, of authorities hiding and running from rioters. You didn't have the same degree of violence as well, also because you didn't have the same degree of resistance from the security forces. So you don't have any deaths or people injured. You had like some injuries, some injured people, mostly journalists, but they had like minor injuries. You didn't have blood like we saw in the capital, but you had like a mob that took a bigger part of Brazilian power.
Francis, if all the signs were there, why didn't local officials prevent this from happening?
Well, some analysts think that the police was complicit with what happened. We have the Brasilia, the district, the federal district has a state of state, and it has the status of the state, and it has its own governor. Its governor is a close ally from Bolsonaro. His chief of security was Bolsonaro's justice minister as well. He was also a very close ally from Bolsonaro, and he is the person that commands the police. So the police was very passive. They even like escorted some of the protesters from their camp in front of the army's headquarters to the government palaces. They were filmed taking selfies and laughing on the camera. So there was like very serious accusations of the police being omiss and even complicit to what was going on. Now there will be a great investigation on which of these military forces were complicit to what happened, and they vote all of them to be taken to hold accountability. They knew what was happening. Like there was information that 100 of buses were coming to Brazil with over 4,000 protesters. And even though the governor and the chief of security didn't increase the security in the government buildings, the consequence of that is that the head of security was fired yesterday in the evening, and the governor was like removed from office for 90 days from the Supreme Court to investigate which part they took on that.
Very telling insights there from our very own Francis Fanza. Thank you very much for joining us here on DW News.